Hello and welcome back to TIM-DND. Today I'm going to talk about why I use miniatures in my Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games. Um, there's lots of reasons why people use miniatures, but they break down to several different categories, and I'll go over these one at a time. So the first reason to use miniatures is because it points out where everything is for the players, for the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master hasn't got to keep track of where everyone is. Um, the players can see where their characters are, they can see where their friends are, they can see where the enemies are. Um, it removes all the inconsistencies. You can tell that so many enemies will fit within that the range of that fireball. Um, you can tell how far it takes for you to run over to a tree or take cover. You can see if you're in cover compared to where the enemies are. All of these things, it's less time taken up for the players asking the dungeon master, can I make it to these places? Can I see these goblins? Can I hide behind the barrels? All of these things are removed somewhat when you have miniatures on the table. um, I don't think this always removes all of those questions. There's still certain degrees of ambiguity, because a miniature doesn't move like a normal human does. It's literally a fixed point. So whether or not you can duck down behind barrels or not is more up to the DM's discretion. Um, but it certainly saves a lot of trouble with the positioning and whereabouts you are on the map. Um, Again, if you're flying or climbing onto a roof, there may be some issues because of the miniatures. But at the same time, there's lots of ways to fix these situations, whether that be an upturned glass to signify that you're flying, um, or blue tack to attach your miniature to a roof, or whatever. Lots of different ways to deal with that. Um, and I find the miniatures just reduce a lot of the question marks about positioning and the tactical side of the gameplay. The second reason I like to use miniatures is because when the players advance into an area where you know there's going to be an encounter, you get to place down monsters or creatures which have an impact instantly as being larger than the player's characters, or imposing, or just generally quite scary to look at. Um, it's one thing being able to describe a giant coming towards them and being 3 or 4 times taller than them, um, and you should definitely still do all of these descriptions and explanations of what's happening as part of the game. But when you actually place a miniature down in front of the players and they have to face the giant that you've just described, or the monster or the dragon, whatever it is, then that gives them something physical to look at, and they can really see what you're talking about when you've said the giant is 4 times taller than you or wielding a massive club. I mean, you can see here the club that the giant is wielding is as big as the player characters. Um, it provokes fear, provokes some sort of amazement, and it also gives the players a sense of scale. Uh, of course, there are problems with this. Um, if you don't have the miniature you need, then miniatures restrict you in what you want to place down, or you have to place down a miniature which represents what you're talking about, instead of what you're actually um, putting in front of the players. So, for example, these stone giants might end up being frost giants or fire giants. The red dragon that you wanted to put down, maybe a black dragon, whatever you have available. Um, I always try and stick close to what I have available. And I also try my hardest to make sure my encounters are based on what miniature collection I have. Sometimes the miniature itself inspires you for an encounter or an adventure. This particular miniature doesn't exist in the 2014 rulebook monster manual, and so I'd have to create rules for it myself, or look it up in some other book, which I may or may not have access to. Um, Regardless, if I use it as is and try and work out some rules for it. Perhaps it's a summoned creature or amalgamation of creatures that a necromancer has um, summoned into existence, or perhaps the necromancer himself has become this creature because of a spell which has gone drastically wrong. Either way, suddenly the characters are placed in a situation where they have to deal with whatever this is. Um, I often get inspired by the models I'm painting as I'm painting them, or perhaps I'll peruse my collection of miniatures and something will jump out at me and I'll create an adventure out of that. Uh, in this case, I haven't created an adventure for this yet, but I have a few ideas in mind. Um, so my players need to watch out for that in the future. The final reason that I like to use miniatures is because painting them and preparing them for the game is an extra layer to the hobby. Um, as a dungeon master, I spend a large amount of time preparing an adventure. I then spend some time playing the game with my players. But apart from that, I also spend a bit of time painting miniatures ready for the game, um, and preparing scenery and crafting scenery for that game. Um, I put all of this into the same section as the miniature painting, but realistically, the crafting of models and things is a secondary part of that in itself. Um, but painting miniatures takes a bit of time, takes a bit of practice, and gives me a bit of pleasure as well. Of course, you don't need to paint miniatures in order to use miniatures in your game. You can buy pre-painted miniatures, which will give you all of the benefits that I've previously talked about. You don't have to use three-dimensional miniatures either. You can buy or make two-dimensional miniatures, which again will give you most of the benefits that I've talked about. Um, I find three-dimensional miniatures look better and work better for my personal preference, but I know two-dimensional miniatures not only are cheaper and a lot more readily available, you can literally print them off of a printer as long as you use decent cardstock to attach them to, and you can basically print off anything you can find an image of using a search engine. Um, but for me, a three-dimensional miniature being placed on the tabletop gives a bit more impact, and I just prefer it. As I said, painting the miniatures themselves gives me an extra layer to my hobby and allows me to um, partake in my hobby when I'm not working on an adventure and when I'm not actually playing the game. So there you go. That's why I like using miniatures in my games. Um, I don't use miniatures for all encounters. I don't use them for social encounters. Um, there are times when the situation means that a theatre of the mind game, encounter is much more suited than a miniature encounter. However, I do like using miniatures in my games. I find it saves a lot of the questions, as I've stated earlier. I think that they can be impactful and aid the imagination of the players. Um, and as I said, it adds an extra layer to the hobby as a whole, which I quite enjoy doing. This isn't to say that you need miniatures in games. It's certainly not to say that you should use miniatures in games. There's plenty of alternatives out there, whether that's two-dimensional miniatures, pre-painted miniatures, chess pieces, or literally playing theatre of the mind all the time. Um, I just am stating what I personally prefer and how I like to play my games. If you're just starting out and you're thinking to yourself, how on earth am I going to get as many all these miniatures together? Um, don't worry. Focus first on what miniatures you need for your first game. You'll soon find that you can build up a reasonable number of miniatures quite quickly if you buy one set of goblins, for instance, or orcs. Um, your first couple of games might involve those creatures. If you then want a boss monster, you could buy an ogre who's leading the orcs, or perhaps is just um, working with the orcs. All of these things allow you to slowly build up your collection of miniatures, your options available. If you've already got a Warhammer army or something similar, then that can be a great source of miniatures. My first few games I played with my children, I used my undead Warhammer army. So a lot of their first games were against zombies and skeletons, and later on wights and wraiths. That's great as a good way of starting if you've got access to that. If you have access to no miniatures at all, remember you can use chess pieces and things until you've built up enough miniatures that you can use. Um, if you've got a game like Hero Quest or something like that in the background, then all the miniatures from there can be used in Dungeons and Dragons. If a game like Hero Quest gives you access to skeletons, zombies, mummies, orcs, goblins, you name it, you've got a large number of different things in that sort of game. But don't feel that you need to stress about that. If you've only got a five or six goblin miniatures and you're using those to represent orcs the next adventure, or zombies on the following one, that's fine. It's fine. You don't feel stressed into spending huge amounts of money on miniatures that for a game that you play once or twice a month. It's not worth it unless you're enjoying the collecting and the painting and the those aspects of the game, which I do. That's enough of me talking about it. I could go on for quite some time, and I already have. So I'll shut up now. I'll let you get back to whatever you were doing before you clicked on this video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed hearing me rabbit on about miniatures, or if you enjoyed looking at the miniatures that I was showcasing there. Please also comment down below if you have other reasons that you use miniatures or don't use miniatures, or if you think everything I've said was a load of rubbish. Always happy to see a few comments in the boxes below. Thanks, guys. I'll catch you later.